This video was made possible by viewers like you over on Patreon. Check out the link in the description to hear how you can help make shows like this be even more amazing. Hey everyone, Gaijin Goombah here. Well, I'm finally back to 100% health and just ready to tear into 2023 with even more cultural analysis and popular media. And that kind of reminds me, what did the patrons vote on for this month?
Bro, it wasn't even close. Nearly half the votes were for a cultural breakdown of 80s comic legend Usagi Yojimbo.
2023 is a year of the rabbit after all, so if nothing else, it's pretty thematic.
Well, either that or the fans had a look at Usagi Yojimbo Chronicles Season 2 on Netflix and just felt, well, nothing. I know this is a reimagining of the franchise for kids, and I will say that Season 1 had a lot for me to chew on as a fan of the franchise and cultural analyst. In fact, it gave us enough for a 15-minute video on Season 1. But Season 2? It's just so much nothing. Like, there's no overarching conflict or goal. It's either a manufactured character personality flaw that gets resolved within 15 minutes, there's some big negative consequence that happens and then just becomes inconsequential, or villains just decide to be good guys for some reason. Oh yeah, let's also not forget the episode that attributed Zen meditation to getting high. No, that is not a joke.
Yeah, I hate to take a dump on a series that's obviously not for me, but he's kinda right. There's so little adversity in the series that I fail to see what makes it interesting to anyone. Completely unlike the original comic series by Stan Sakai, who has the OG Usagi living his ronin life with perilous adventure after perilous adventure. Despite the series coming out in 1984 and still going on today, Stan Sakai's series of 165 issues has yet to leave me feeling bored or disconnected through the plot, doing so by never wavering from the serious tone, bombastic action, and fantasy undertone that comes with its setting of samurai-centric Edo Japan.
Which is why it's such a juicy topic for Which Samurai. Stan Sakai has done such an amazing job interweaving Japanese and samurai culture and history within the Usagi series that it's made us want to super deep dive hard into his work just to see how much he used to build his comics world.
Yeah, and that being said, and as I've previously stated, this series has been going from 1984 to today. There is no way I'd be able to compress every samurai historical or cultural reference into an appropriately sized video. So instead, I want to focus on Usagi's beginnings, to compare his origin story to the typical life of samurai children and see just how much influence he took. After all, I don't think we've ever talked about life of young samurai in this series, so now's the perfect time.
So where does the tale of our intrepid young rabbit begin?
Well, the Usagi Yojimbo Origins comic opens at the close of the 16th century and details the time as the age of civil wars, obviously a reference to Japan's Single Kujidai period of warring states. And this is actually extremely important because despite popular belief, the concept of samurai was an ever-changing one throughout history. Everything from weapons and armor to military strategy to personal ideas and belief were all massively varied throughout samurai history. Therefore, knowing exactly when this series takes place, we can get a better idea of how samurai our ronin rabbit is for the time period. Once we establish the flashback sequence as Usagi explains his life from childhood again, we immediately trip on a massive samuraiism in the story. Usagi's father explaining to him how he's almost of age to take on the Chonmage haircut and receive his swords.
Wait, is this Gampuku? Because this sounds a lot like Gampuku.
Yeah, I think it does too, but Gampuku as a ceremony has had a lot of different evolutions throughout the centuries. Beginning back in the Nara period in the 700s, aristocratic kids between the ages of 10 and 20 would go through the rite of Gampuku to become adults and take on adult responsibilities. But back then, it wasn't done with a haircut and a sword, but rather a hat. See, the word Gampuku itself literally means head wearing, and kids of the court would finalize this ritual by donning the ceremonial court cap called a kanmuri. This gave the child the ability to marry, rise in court ranks, and so on and so forth. What's interesting though is that when the samurai took power from the court and started the Bafuku government, the ceremony changed from a hat to a samurai helmet. And in time, the child of a samurai would gain their armor and swords accompanied by the responsibilities to work like adults and participate in open warfare.
So, not too far from the comic, huh?
Not really, though I'm still digging around to see if all samurai-oriented Gampukus involved helmets that replaced court hats, or if the Chonmage eventually symbolically took the place of the kabuto. But you wanna know what's really freaking weird? One of the most important aspects of Gampuku is the taking of a new name for the kid embarking into adulthood. Kids are given new names at the ages of 12 and 15, but Usagi never got an additional or different name. Honestly, I think that's the bigger factor missing here from Usagi's Gampuku. Man, we're 6 minutes into this video and we're only on the 3rd page of the 1st issue when it comes to Usagi's origins. But I gotta pump the brakes again one more time because in the very next panel we have this. The two swords, the katana and the wakizashi, are the symbols of the samurai. Indeed, they are the soul of the samurai.
Okay, maybe they're the soul of samurai fashion, but the soul of the samurai? Yeah, I don't know about that one, Chief. Now, granted, samurai historically had been wearing daisho since the 1300s in the Muromachi period, but it was never specifically the katana and the wakizashi. Samurai at this time period liked to mix and match a bit. You could have a tachi with a tanto, or a katana with a chisai katana, and eventually the wakizashi started gaining the favor of the samurai for its utility in indoor fighting. Not much else. Now, if Usagi's childhood flashback took place during the Edo period rather than before it, maybe the statement would make more sense. Because in 1629, the Tokugawa shogunate decreed that samurai had to wear daisho during duty as a symbol of their authority. But if you want to get into the technicalities of whose soul the blade represents, it's more of the swordsmiths than anything. You ever hear the folktales of Muramasa and Masamune? When both placed a sword of their making into a flowing stream, Muramasa's swords would constantly slice floating debris as the water went past it, reflecting his supposed desire to create the deadliest blades he could. While Masamune's sword, reflecting his more balanced ideas of fighting, had the same debris float around his sword rather than through it. Even without the fantasy folklore, you can actually see the state of the swordsmith's soul holding a great importance in the blade making process. Some would even hang Shimenawa rope around their workplace. This was to keep their souls and the energies that went into the blade making process pure and devoid of keigare. So, I don't know about this one, man.
Well, I'm gonna give Stan the credit he deserves for correctly portraying Chiburi. In a lot of katana-oriented media and practice, there's a motion that finalizes a fight, or a kata, the dramatic act of flicking away or wiping away blood called chiburi. It can be as simple as a small flicking gesture in Iaido to the wiping of the full blade press against one's bicep and forearm to the rapid spinning of the sword itself. But the funny thing is about all these methods is that while I get they do look really cool and are important for practices like Iaido, they're anything but practical. A flick or spin of the blade is gonna get some of the blood off, sure, but not all of it. You're still gonna have enough on there that's gonna rust your blade and stain the inside of your saya if you sheath it just after. And as for the arm wiping gesture, yeah, you're gonna get most of the blood off your blade, but it's going to stain the crap out of your armor, or worse, clothing. Yeah, ever try to clean bloodstains out of fabric with limitations of 15th century technology? It ain't easy. So again, props to Stan Sakai for not falling into this trope trap and showing his samurai characters wiping blades with actual cloth. So, time goes on with Usagi and his childhood friend Kenichi parting ways as Kenichi goes on to join the Dokura fencing school and Usagi becomes the pupil of an old lion samurai, Katsuichi, who only a little later on explains to Usagi what is most important to a samurai, completing his lecture with, "Besides the military arts and literary arts, the classics, calligraphy, music, and etiquette must also be studied, as well as the spiritual arts of meditation and the tea ceremony." This is another super subjective aspect of growing up as a samurai because, much like wearing daisho, this wasn't regulated until after the Single Kujidai Warring States period. Now, that's not to say that samurai never cared about the arts or etiquette. Miyamoto Musashi, who lived before and during the Edo period, states in his Book of the Five Rings that, "It is said that the warrior is the twofold way of pen and sword, and he should have a taste for both ways." Now, much like other well-known historical books about samurai such as the Hagakure, we're only seeing one perspective. Either one individual in the case of the Book of the Five Rings, or one clan in the case of the Hagakure. And that isn't to say that these aren't good examples of samurai thought, but it's important to acknowledge that not every samurai clan shared the exact same dispositions, nor did every single individual samurai have the exact same ethics. However, it's pretty obvious that a lot of samurai cared about the artistic things in life before the Tokugawa shogunate. But that being said, it was Tokugawa himself that made mandate a samurai's need to learn such things. In 1615, the regulations for military houses, or buke shohato, stated that the study of literature and the practice of the military arts, including archery and horsemanship, must be cultivated diligently. Within this policy is outlined the concept of bun and bu, or the arts and the warrior respectively, stating that on the left hand literature and on the right hand use of arms. So this is another sort of hands up in the air situation. My guess here is that it's possible that Stan Sakai used influences of Miyamoto Musashi for Katsuichi, but it also shouldn't be taken as a pure blanket statement that all samurai during the Single Kujidai thought this exact same way. And speaking of samurai blanket statements, 3 pages later we hear Katsuichi talking about another Important principle of samurai.
Oh my lord, will you spare me this Bushido nonsense? Bushido as a concept wasn't even coined until long after the story takes place so can we just pack it in?
Whoa, ease off there, bud. Okay, some context. Back in 1900, an infamous book was released to the Western masses called Bushido, the Soul of Japan, written by Nitobe Inazo, son of a samurai and lover of all things Western. The problem here is that Izano contextualized much of samurai life into an oversimplified concept of Bushido, and then mirrored Bushido to that of chivalry, neither of which were a strict warrior code of honor and ethics for samurai or knights. It was more of a casual oversimplification of how knights and samurai lived. Now for samurai specifically, Bushido as a concept was more of a retroactive retrospective for the warrior class who, by the time of the word's coinage, had become an outdated social class that was being pushed further and further into government work, teaching positions, or outright banditry. Bushido started off as a way for nostalgic samurai to try and consolidate their warrior way of life before it died out. A last-ditch effort to cement their place in history by stating that all of these loose ideas and concepts of Bushido were, quote, a highly specified code all along. Despite the fact that, as previously stated, each samurai and clan had their own individual ideals. Bushido is also a concept that had a lot of evolution. From the Boshin War of Imperial versus Shogunate supporters to even World War II, the concept of Bushido has been bent 6 ways from Sunday to mean a multitude of different things relating to samurai, and has not ever been an all-encompassing stringent code of the samurai. It served its symbolic purpose for whatever the time period called for, which isn't a bad thing per se, but it by no means is concrete. Okay, let's see, what do we have next? Oh yeah, the duel that initiated this whole flashback sequence. Back at the beginning of this miniseries, Usagi runs into an ex-ally named Gunichi and wins a duel to the death against him. By this point in the story though, Usagi makes mention that he needs to go report this duel, which immediately made me ask, where? To whom? We hear a lot of talk about samurai duels to the death, but what is done to sanctify it as a duel and not straight up murder? Turns out, not much. During the Edo period, duels to the death were extremely rare, and even if one was to occur, the duelers needed permission from the shogunate to do so. Which, considering the absolute stranglehold Tokugawa had over his totalitarian state, duels were rarely okayed by the government. Tokugawa was gonna keep his peace by any means necessary, so open violence wasn't exactly on the priority of his list of civil rights. That being said though, before this particular point in time, there was the concept of tsujigiri, or crossroads killing. This used to be the concept of samurai dueling on the road for whatever reason, similar to the duel that we see between Usagi and Gunichi, but by the Sengoku period, the sheer lawlessness of the land evolved tsujigiri from samurai duels to samurai straight up murdering travelers, usually at night, to test out a new blade or a new technique. Something that the Edo government clamped down hard on in 1602 as the act was punishable by death. Usagi stated that this story was only 2 years prior to him becoming a ronin, so it's possible that this duel with Gunichi fell within the Single Kujidai, but he also talks about how 2 years back, the shogunate wasn't solidified yet, implying it is now. So the cultural accuracy of this duel is sadly, again, up in the air.
Yeah, not to mention that a few panels later, we see Usagi giving a random innkeeper Tudio to, quote, take care of the body of the samurai that he just killed. That's not how reporting an official duel works. That's like Han Solo giving the cantina barkeep a coin, apologizing for the mess of Greedo, and calling that an imperial report of self-defense.
Alright, moving on. After being victorious in a dueling tournament held by the Dogora school and besting its best student, Usagi's old childhood friend Kenichi, we find that Usagi had fallen to the service of the great daimyo Mifune for 4 years, rising in ranks and becoming part of Mifune's personal guard. But, as things do go during the Single Kujidai, Usagi's quick to point out how unstable and power-hungry all daimyo have become, and surprise! Ninja attack Mifune and his family, assassinating Mifune's son and wife.
What's this?
TheGeckoNinja?
Oh, are they now? Well, let's see. Shuriken having some mystical property of instant death, wearing black. You know what? I don't have to explain the problems here. I'm sure most of you watching already know the new one that I'd rip into this depiction of Shinobi, but if you don't, be sure to check out our sister side series, Which Ninja, where we pick better ninja than this out of our teeth.
Well, to be fair, this may not be a solid depiction of ninja in isolation, but the reason for this attack and the use of said ninja make all the historical sense in the world. Apparently, the Neko Ninja clan were hired by Lord Hijiki, a minor lord of a neighboring province who, quote, lusted after Lord Mifune's holdings and the power that they brought. Which, yeah, this stuff happened all the time. It's why it's called the Single Kujidai after all. This was also the golden age of shinobi, who were, in fact, hired constantly to act in the interest of rival daimyo trying to grab power. Though in those cases it was more about information and espionage rather than direct assaults on the castles of daimyo. But hey, it's an action comic from the 80s, what do you expect? Besides, this sets up for probably the most samurai thing of all to happen in this flashback story, an actual massive scale battle. I don't know if I've ever outright said or not, but if you want to see the best petri dish for samurai isms, you can't do better than a battlefield. Heck, just on the first panel of this fight alone, I could see some legit Kamon Sashimono banners over there, specifically those of the Hojo clan that, ironically enough, held the shogunate of Japan from 1199 to 1333. Also, in a lot of panels, we see that most of the samurai in the background are fighting with polearms, which, yes, even in the Sengoku period, samurai favored the long range and flexibility of a good yari.
Yeah, but that's spoiled a wee bit when every main character pulls out their sword to, I don't know, limit their own range and fighting capability. I'll give this fight sequence credit though, it does almost one-to-one mirror one of the greatest samurai battles in the Single Kujidai. Usagi states that the battle between Mifune and Hijiki happens in a place called Adachigahara. And boy, oh boy, what does that sound like to ya?
Ooh, Sekigahara. Alright, if you're not pointing at the screen going, oh god, oh god, oh god, oh god, let me clarify why the sequence is so freaking amazing in the context of IRL samurai history. During the battle between Mifune and Hijiki, General Toda, the one in charge of one of the reserve units of Mifune's army, betrays Mifune at the last minute. With this, Mifune's forces are shocked and routed, with the victory going to Hijiki, forcing Usagi into his current state of being a ronin after the death of his daimyo. This, almost verbatim, is what happened at the Battle of Sekigahara, during which a final battle between the eastern army of Ieyasu Tokugawa and the western army of Ishida Mitsunari would determine who would rule Japan. During the fighting, one of Mitsunari's reserve units under Kobayakawa Hideaki did not follow any orders given to him by Mitsunari and just kinda stood there, despite claiming his loyalty to Mitsunari. Historical theory suggests that Kobayakawa was still weighing his options under who would make the better leader. However, a volley of arquebus shot from Tokugawa's forces shook Kobayakawa to a decision, and then he betrayed Mitsunari on the battlefield to join Tokugawa, slamming his army into Mitsunari's flank and solidifying Tokugawa's future as shogun. In both battles, we have not only two armies fighting each other for a grand outcome based on the perspective of the characters and situation, not only do these two battles sound eerily similar, but they both conclude with one army's certain victory being lost to a single general's defect to the other side. I can't for a minute believe that the Battle of Adachigahara wasn't wholly based on the real-life battle of Sekigahara.
Alright, that's hard to argue. But despite having an interesting story, good character design, and not shying away from the violent nature of samurai life from birth to adulthood, I still kinda have to question how much of this comic series is based on what samurai really were, and what samurai were thought to be back in the 80s and 90s.
Well, do bear in mind that we have almost 40 years of hindsight here. The idea of samurai, ninja, and even Japan itself was a very different thing back in the 80s. So I don't think Stan was wrong for using the references that he did because they reflect the time of what samurai were believed to be. It's not absolutely incorrect, we're just less wrong about what we know today versus 40 years ago. Also bear in mind that this is what, the first of 4 or 5 issues in an ongoing story that has lasted near 40 years? We've not even scratched the surface on samurai influences that this series has. Besides, this is a story portraying pseudo-Edo drama. I don't think it's completely fair to try and compare actual history to a 1980s comic book with fuzzy animal people. But what do you think, gang? I know there are a lot of you out there who have read more Usagi Yojimbo than I have, so do you think Stan Sakai pulls deep from real samurai history, or is this more of a hyper-romanticization of it? Let me know in the comments below, and a huge thanks to the people responsible for this video even existing, my patrons. You all still surprise me with not necessarily what ends up being voted on, but just how massively one-sided it ends up being. And I'm glad we were able to make this one, as holy crap, there are still so much more Usagi we could analyze. So, if you're digging our vids on cultural analysis through games, anime, comics, and more, sub up, get notified, and come back every other week or so to a brand new tangential look into pop media and the real-life inspirations behind it. But until next time, everyone, this is Gaijin Goombah, signing out.